think Farage is our new Thatcher. You mentioned Thatcher previously. That might be the real reason that Keir Starmer's taken her portrait down. Don't think any of us buy into this bunkum that it's because her portrait is staring down at him. If that is true, it's because he's probably ashamed of what he's doing and knows that if he were to face Thatcher across the ballot box, the dispatch box these days, I mean, that would be a sight, wouldn't it? He'd be absolutely destroyed by Thatcher. And I think he fears Farage as the new Thatcher.
Mark my words, Two Tier Keir Starmer will be the most unpopular and unsuccessful post-war British Prime Minister. Despite his massive majority, he has absolutely no chance of lasting for 5 years in Downing Street. It's impossible, let me tell you, because this arrogant, lying charlatan and chameleon is at war with his own people. He thinks he's keeping a lid on it by jailing white working class folk for so-called rioting or fruity social media posts for disproportionately long periods, but that can only last for so long. Because we know we're not far right. No matter how many times he implies being deeply concerned about mass unrestrained immigration for decades and an illegal invasion of our southern border via the Channel makes us so. There was more of his usual bullshit this weekend.
Do you think that leaders in this country, perhaps also if you look at what we've seen in Germany, also look at what's happened in France, do you think that leaders have been complacent about the rise of the far right?
I am worried about the rise of the far right. I mean, we can see what's happening in Germany with the recent elections, see what's happening in France and other countries. And I'm worried about the far right because it's the sort of snake oil of the easy answer. I'm convinced that the answer to it is delivery in government. So the best argument against the far right, the best argument against the easy answer is to deliver, to bring about the change that we promised we'd bring about. And that change was to improve living standards so people are better off, to make sure we got properly functioning public services, particularly the NHS, and to deal with issues like immigration and crime and sewage. We have to deliver on that. And that's why I'm utterly focused on ensuring we can bring about that change in the period that we've got in government.
Who is this far right he speaks of? What is this snake oil? Let me tell you, that line is not going to hold. As Peter Lloyd posted on X, the far right aren't stabbing kids. The far right don't roam the streets with machetes. The far right aren't 90% of MI5's watch list. The far right don't blow up trains and pop concerts. The far right aren't grooming white girls. The far right doesn't really exist. Chris Rose added, Keir Starmer told the BBC he's worried about the rise of the far right. No mention of Islamist terrorism, which accounts for approximately 67% of attacks since 2018, about 3/4 of the MI5 caseload, the sectarian MPs who ran dirty campaigns against Labour MPs. And Chris Davies continued, since 2005, 95 people have been murdered by Muslim extremists. 3 people have been murdered by the quote-unquote far right. Over 90% of people on the security forces terror watch list are Muslims. Over 75% of their caseload are Muslims. But the far right is the problem? Indeed, it was only after Laura Kuenssberg, in full British bashing corporation mode, tried to get Starmer to condemn the so-called rioters as racist that slippery Starmer finally mentioned the word immigration before immediately shutting the discussion down again. Watch this extraordinary exchange.
Do you think the rioters were racists?
I think the far right. I think there was racism there. I think it featured differently across the country. I went over to Belfast, for example, to talk to the police service of Northern Ireland, who had petrol bombs thrown at them. And there's no doubt there was racism there. So there was racism far right, but it was totally illegitimate. It is not acceptable in any society. And yes, I accept that, across the country, people have strong views about things like immigration. I accept that, but I'm not prepared to tolerate that sort of disorder under any circumstances, nor will I change government policy one bit as a result of that sort of violence.
Do you think we're a racist country?
I don't think we're a racist country. I think we're a country of decent people, tolerant people. The real Britain was the people who came out the day after in Southport It was incredible. People came out with their trowels, with their brooms, they cleaned up, they rebuilt. They're the real face of Britain. And that's the Britain that I think is essential to reuniting and bringing this country back together.
The takeaway from that could not be any more clear, could it? Caring about immigration, according to both the national broadcaster and the national government, makes you racist. So we're not even going to have the discussion with you plebs. No wonder Nigel Farage is thinking seriously about becoming Prime Minister in 2029, as I have predicted he will, by making Reform UK the biggest party.
Yes.
Do you have ambitions to be Prime Minister?
I have ambitions for Reform to be the biggest party at the next general election.
But you have to bring in the Tories. You have to do something with the Tories to get to that position, don't you? Or you think you can somehow get Reform to the biggest party without the Conservative support? It just doesn't seem to add up.
Well, no, nothing I've ever done's added up. Fighting to leave the European Union didn't add up. There are many unlikely things that happen in the world of politics. Look, we've just finished a general election. You know, I'm laying out a 5-year plan with a very capable, competent young businessman called Zia Youssef, who's now chairman of the party, and we are building a national political party. And whatever happens, happens. But I do think this. I do think that the growth of Reform, if it happens in the way that I believe it can, will come at the expense of the Labour Party, not the Conservatives.
And you would, if you win that, if you won that election, you would want to be Prime Minister. You want to lead this country.
Well, I mean, Theo, you know, yes, if it's me, but who knows? By then, somebody younger and better looking than me may have come along. You know, we're right at the beginning of a 5-year project, and I think even little samples of weekly by-elections that take place on district councils up and down the country are showing that Reform that actually is doing well since the election, that we have a membership that is growing very quickly. No, we are very much on the up.
No, Nigel. It's going to be you. We know it's going to be you. So predictably, at the TUC, Paul Nowak described Reform UK's Farage as a Putin apologist fraud. Watch.
And they represent this country far better than the far right ever will. I don't believe for one moment that most of those who voted Reform at the last election are racist. But let me say this clearly and unequivocally. Nigel Farage isn't a friend of the working class. He's a fraud. A public school educated, private equity loving, NHS privatising, Putin apologist fraud.
Absolute rubbish, of course. Blatant lies. In fact, defamatory lies, if Nigel wanted to go down that path. But what this is all about, in my opinion, is this panic that is gripping the left in this country as they realise that it's not the Conservatives they need to be worried about, it's Reform UK. How thin-skinned is Slippery Starmer, by the way, to the extent where he cannot even have our greatest post-war Prime Minister, a true Conservative who probably would now be described as a member of the far right, Margaret Thatcher, staring down at him.
Make it more comfortable is take down the portrait of Margaret Thatcher that was put there by Gordon Brown, a Labour Prime Minister. Is that a bit petty, or was she really making you feel uncomfortable staring down at you in the study?
Well, the first thing is, Gordon Brown didn't actually hang it in the study. It was hanging somewhere. It was commissioned and hanging somewhere else. I think it was David Cameron that brought it into the study. I used the study for quietly reading most afternoons where I've got to have, there's a difficult paper that I need to. And this is not actually about Margaret Thatcher at all. I don't like images and pictures of people staring down at me. I've had it all my life. When I was a lawyer, I used to have sort of pictures of judges staring. I don't like it. I like landscapes. So this is my study, it's my private place where I go to work. I didn't want a picture of anyone. It's a picture of landscapes. As a lawyer, people tried to persuade me that I needed pictures of judges staring at me the whole time. I didn't like it. I don't like it anymore if they're politicians. There isn't any politician staring at me in my study where I just get on with the work I need to get on with.
Just make it more comfortable.
Like with everything with Slippery Starmer, he was lying there. Because as James Heal, the journalist, pointed out, an FOI shows his Commons Office does have 5 portraits and a bust, all of former premiers Churchill, Pitt, Melbourne, Disraeli and Peel. Esther McVey, the former Tory cabinet minister, wrote, "I think we can safely conclude that whenever Starmer's lips are moving, it is a barefaced lie. And for that reason, I come back to my initial case, that there is no way this guy who is at war with us, at war with the silenced majority, is ever going to last 5 years. But even if he does, it's very clear that the biggest threat to his authority and Labour running this country into the ground over the next decade is a certain Nigel Farage." Now let me bring in today's superstar panel. And it is brilliant to have back with me today Nick Buckley, MVE, the charity campaigner and political activist who actually previously did run to be the Mayor of Manchester under the Reform UK umbrella. He has done it again since, though, as an independent. And joining us for the first time on Outspoken, but I'm a big fan of this man, Russell Quirk, the property expert, political commentator and columnist. So Nick, because you have this previous relationship with Reform UK, let me kick off with you. What do you make of this growing paranoia and growing fear within the far left? You saw it at the TUC conference there, but you also see it with Slippery Starmer himself, trying to turn Nigel Farage into public enemy one, and also brand anyone who supports what he has to say as quote-unquote far right.
The left and the elite in this country have been quite happy with the Tories, because the Tories are basically socialists anyway. Reform are offering something different. Reform are saying we're going to be different and we're not part of the uni party, we're not part of the elite, and we're going to bring change. That terrifies them because you cannot control that. They have no idea if Reform get to power what they're going to do. We all knew what the Tories are going to do, which is exactly the same as what Labour were going to do. So just that one fact terrifies them. And that's why the next 5 years, 3 years are all about demonization of Farage and Reform. And down the line, they will start going after the supporters of Reform UK as well.
First, though, digestive issues are caused by a potential toxin that's in all of the, quote, healthy foods that scientists have been telling us to eat with a fraudulent food pyramid for the longest time. And this potential toxin causes digestive issues, according to Dr. Gundry, a world-renowned cardiologist. This is affecting millions of people nationwide. Warning signs include weight gain and fatigue and digestive discomfort, plus stiff joints, even skin problems, actually. Well, Dr. Gundry explains these side effects are often mistaken for normal signs of aging because digestive issues develop usually over a matter of years and sometimes even decades. I can assure you that the damage is probably caused by these health foods and is far from normal. The good news is you can easily help fix the problem from your own home. It's very simple. You just have to know which foods are actually healthy and which contain this hidden potential toxin. So you can find this yourself if you visit right now gutcleanseprotocol.com/outspoken. That's gutcleanseprotocol.com/outspoken. Now, you can see the QR code there on the screen, so you can just use that, enter the website, but I've also put the link in our show notes on YouTube and Rumble. Because after years of research, Dr. Gundry has decided to release an informative video to the public. I've watched it. It's free and uninterrupted, showcasing exactly which foods you need to avoid. So go find that video at gutcleanseprotocol.com/outspoken and click on the link in the description below. Russell Quirk, you believe that Keir Starmer is actually the biggest threat to our democracy since World War II. What do you mean?
Yeah, I do, because he has now revealed himself rather more quickly than we thought as a tyrant and as an autocrat. I think he stole the election under false pretenses. I think he pretended to be rather Blairite, Dan, really, in that, he was all about wealth and growth and home ownership. Actually, you could argue that those policies are rather right-wing, rather conservative. And within minutes of landing in Downing Street, he ends up showing his colours as an extreme left-wing, ideologically driven autocrat. I mean, he is of the extreme left, and we're seeing that. And by the way, the people that actually might be putting comments now saying, well, you know, he's not that bad. I mean, this guy's worse than Jeremy Corbyn. At least with Jeremy Corbyn, you knew what you were getting. This guy is a politician and a prime minister by stealth. And not only has he done things already that are not in the manifesto, so for instance, the early release of 40,000 dangerous prisoners, immigration amnesties, stealing 10 million pensioners' winter fuel allowance from them, all these things that were not in the manifesto. But I would go further. I think this man is so driven by a kind of sixth form ideology, which is of the far left. That's why he's so worried about reform, because he knows that by him lurching to the left and presumably staying there as long as he can stay in place, there's going to be a huge gap, a huge vacuum to fill, particularly if the Tories mess up the leadership contest, which I think they probably will.
Yes.
That vacuum is going to be filled by reform. So a man that labels his opponents as something of a bogeyman type nature. We've kind of seen that before in the late 1930s when Hitler did that to the Jews. Also seen back in the late 1930s, the Nazis starting to at first vilify, then censor, then imprison their political opponents. Now that's rather familiar over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Dan, isn't it?
Yes. I totally agree. And the thing is, people will say it's hyperbole. The mainstream media don't even want to cover it. But I'm sorry, we see evidence of this two-tier policing. Look, there are some of the victims of it on a daily basis at the moment. And it is completely disturbing. You know, people who cause no injury to anyone being locked up for 9 years, while Muslim men who literally beat up 3 women at a petrol station, receive no jail time whatsoever. So that is going on. Nick Buckley, what about the personality of Nigel Farage? What do you think he has to do in order to become Prime Minister? And can he?
Oh, that's a hell of a question. I've no idea. Yeah, I'm sure he's got a better idea than me what he needs to do. I'm not a politician. I think if I was going to give him any advice, it's all about how does he connect to the average Brit in the UK? Because the average person I speak to is sick of all politicians, is sick of all political parties. We've been lied to for at least, for generations, but definitely for 30 years. Keir Starmer is just the latest person in this long line. And the only way Keir Starmer is different is he's either not clever enough, which I doubt, or he doesn't care about the mask anymore now. He's ripped the mask off and he's saying to the people, I'm here, there's nothing you can do about it, and it's my way or the highway. Our last 5 politicians have been exactly the same. Our last 5 members of Prime Minister have been exactly the same, but they didn't have the cojones to say that to the British people. So I think Nigel Farage needs to connect with the average people because they want something different. They want to be patriotic. They don't want to be called far right. They just want a better life. And it doesn't take much to give us a better life.
Russell, are you a fan of Farage?
I am. I think Farage is our new Thatcher. You mentioned Thatcher previously. That might be the real reason that Keir Starmer's taken her portrait down. I don't think any of us buy into this bunkum that it's because her portrait is staring down at him. If that is true, it's because he's probably ashamed of what he's doing and knows that if he were to face Thatcher across the ballot box, the dispatch box these days, I mean, that would be a sight, wouldn't it? He'd be absolutely destroyed by Thatcher. And I think he fears Farage as the new Thatcher. And what I mean by that is not just the fact that they share very, very similar principles. And let's be clear, Dan, Farage is not this kind of, this extremist, this far right individual that, of course, the mainstream media would have us believe. If you look at everything that the Reform Party is saying, everything that Farage has said, everything that was in that contract with the public in the run-up to the July the 4th election, there's nothing in there that wouldn't have been in the Conservative manifesto of 1979. So reform, in my view, and I say this as a proud Thatcherite, reform, in my view, are conservative. Of course, the previous Conservative government was not very conservative, and that's what Keir Starmer is concerned about. But to kind of answer Nick's question or expand on Nick's answer a little, I think that the Reform Party are new. they don't have much in the way of ground support. I think they have some very, very talented people amongst them, particularly, Richard Tice, Ben Habib, we can go on and on. Obviously, that would expand. There'll be more defections. There were actually 2 defections from the Conservative Party on Southend City Council.
Yes, I've got them on later in the show.
Oh, are they? Oh, fantastic.
Yes, for an exclusive interview, so I can't wait to hear about why they
defected. There'll be a lot more of that. But I think they need ground support. What I saw where I live in Brentwood and Essex, which is a very conservative constituency, was that the Conservatives traditionally have lots and lots of people out there to knock on doors and canvass and leaflet. Reform didn't have that. So I think Nick's right about connecting with the public, but I think if the public want change, and I know we overuse this word, we always need change, don't we, based on the current regime. But I think if we really, really want to save Britain from being completely destroyed, frankly, as it may well be over the next 2 or 3 years, as we lurch back to the 1970s, I think people have got to get out to physically help reform on the doorsteps. We've got to get the message out there. We've got to get leaflets. Now, when I say we, I'm not suggesting for a second that I'm necessarily a dyed-in-the-wool Reform Party member or activist. But if we want there to be an antithesis to the Labour Party and its extreme left approach, but also a very, very insipid Conservative Party that are largely irrelevant now as far as the electorate are concerned, then people have got to get out there and help the Reform Party on the doorsteps.
But what's so important about being independent is I only ever tell you about products I use and truly believe in. So let me talk about Verso. As you know, I've entered my 40s really thinking about staying healthy. And I exercise, although I injured my ankle at the weekend, so can't at the moment, which makes my nutrition even more important. But that will only get you so far. Scientists like David Sinclair have proven we can now reverse aging with interventions that go beyond healthy habits. For me, I wanted a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, but one backed up by solid evidence. So that's why I use Cellbean by Verso. It has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels, which are the stuff that power every cell in your body. I've been taking the product for a number of months now. At the start of my day, it has been transformative. Fasting's easier, I've lost fat, I'm eating less too, believe it or not. The team at Verso tell me that is due to its blood sugar regulation effects, which lead to fewer cravings. I'm sleeping better, waking up with more energy, actually feeling happier too. So this product has taken years off my life. I would love you to experience the same thing. Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced to guarantee you are getting what you paid for. And I'm very excited that today Verso is giving us an incredible offer. If you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order. All you need to do is use the coupon code outspoken. The link is in our show notes on YouTube and Rumble, but I'll repeat it for you now. buy.ver.so/outspoken. Use the coupon code outspoken for 15% off. Indeed, you mentioned some of those talented people. Richard Tice is one of them, and he has been campaigning hard on the issue of two-tier policing, specifically involving the shocking case at Manchester Airport. Here's the latest on what he had to say about it.
The police have to get out body cam footage from their officers, CCTV footage, in order that the truth is told. And unbelievably, here we are, I think some 6 or 7 weeks on. Yeah. As far as I'm aware, those gentlemen you generously called them, who assaulted the police officers, they've still not been charged. No. Now, quite rightly, when you had those horrific riots recently, those who assaulted emergency workers and police officers were charged and brought to justice very promptly. Well, why haven't these two individuals been charged and brought to justice very promptly? I'll tell you why. It's because it's virtue signalling to an ethnic minority. That's why it's a serious allegation I'm making. But I tell you what, this is absolute cast iron bottom proof of two-tier policing, two-tier justice. Yes. It's absolute disgrace.
But Sir Keir Starmer says that's not an issue.
This is proof that it is issue. And the fact that he's tetchy about it is also proof that it's for real. The police...
He's doing a great job on this, isn't he, Nick Buckley? Because it is completely true. How on earth can justice be rushed for a white working class person who happened to post something slightly offensive on Facebook or X and ends up locked up for 3 years? But when it comes to people who are literally beating up the police, according to what we see on that CCTV footage, goes at a snail's pace.
Some groups in our community, in our country, have more value than others. So the white working class have no value to Labour, have no value. They've stopped voting for the Labour Party over generations. Most of them don't even go out and vote now. So they have no value. The Muslim community, on the other hand, are still supporting Labour. Some of them are beginning to drift away. So Labour are doing whatever they can now to retain that Muslim bloc vote because they're important to Labour. So this interference, this political interference with the police is to secure that vote. I used to be based in police stations 20 years ago. I've trained police officers when I worked for Manchester Council. I saw 20 years ago two-tier policing. It's been going on for decades and decades. All that's happened now since Black Lives Matter, and then since we've got mobile phones we've got cameras on our phones, is we get to see it every day now. Where 20 years ago, nobody saw it unless you worked with the police.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons, isn't it, Russell? You have the likes of Tony Blair wanting to shut down social media.
Well, yes, they want to censor Elon Musk, shut down social media, or rather the people on social media that they don't agree with. You hear from some, again, I call them far left commentators, that they think the internet should be regulated. They don't like opinions that don't accord with their own, and certainly don't like freedom of speech. And the fact is, the logic around that is that, in a free society, in a society where there is freedom of expression and free speech, it comes down to the power of an individual's argument. So you either win the argument on the argument by way of logic and persuasion and data, or you don't. Now, if you lose the argument, it probably means that you're wrong. If you win the argument, it probably means that you're right. What the left are fantastic at doing is shutting down political opponents that they disagree with, because despite the fact that political opponents, like those assembled on this show now, they can't argue successfully. So their only resolution is to shut people down, even as far as the likes of, yes, Elon Musk and others that are, powerful voices. And again, I come back to the point. This is tyranny. This is something of the late 1930s. And we should be very, very.
It's woke tyranny, but it is tyranny.
Yeah,
it is.
And there's, the fact of the matter is, what the Labour, what left-leaners, whether it's the Green Party, because they're left-wing, extreme actually in some respects, the Lib Dems and Labour, what they're concerned about with regard to the example of the Manchester airport thugs, the four of them that haven't yet been charged 7 weeks later, they're simply concerned about backlash and optics and perception. In city centres where there's huge ethnic minority populations, they simply don't want to upset them. And again, where have we heard that before? Where is that familiar from in our fairly recent history in Britain? I'll tell you where it's familiar from, and that's the Rochdale grooming gangs. We have it on record from police officers at the time. They didn't want to pursue those prosecutions. This is Pakistani Muslims raping 10, 12, 13-year-old white British girls. They didn't want to pursue it because they didn't want to ignite bad feeling within those communities. Well, that, I think, is the very opposite of a fair and balanced approach to policing and the criminal justice system. And by the way, who is involved in the Department of Prosecutions, the DPS, way back then? Keir Starmer.
And he doesn't like to talk about that aspect of his record, does he? Just like he doesn't like to talk about the fact that he was the bloke who didn't charge Jimmy Savile. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.